So I get this question pretty often from wholesalers asking about Facebook ads. And the question is how much, what kind of budget should I have if I'm running Facebook ads, right? And that question's kind of, I'm gonna say it's a bad question, but it is like, it's one of those questions where the answer is, it depends, right? And typically when people ask me that question, the first question I ask back is, what markets are you targeting? And from there, I can kind of give an estimate about, what their cost per lead will be, and then ultimately tell them, how many leads it'll typically take to get a contract, and ask another follow-up question, how many contracts are you looking to get each month, right? And then based on the cost per lead and the number of contracts they're trying to get each month, we can kind of reverse engineer, what a healthy budget will look like for their markets. So the first kind of core principle, that you should understand before running Facebook ads is that, your audience size ultimately determines like your cost per lead, right? So the larger your audience size, the lower the cost per lead. And to kind of explain that and dive deeper, a little bit deeper into that, basically like a bigger audience, Facebook has, more opportunity to put your ads in front of the right people, right? So if they can consistently put your ads in front of the right people, because there's a huge pool of people that, need whatever need your services, right? Then, it'll be much cheaper for Facebook to find those people. Whereas maybe, you're targeting an audience size of 100, right? Facebook's just gonna show your ads to the same people over and over and over again, right? And you're gonna spend a ton of money, showing the same people the same ads, and if they never need your services, right, then you're just gonna, you know, waste money, spend money until hopefully one day you get one lead come through out of a pool of 100 people, but you're gonna spend a ton of money until somebody's ready to fill it out. So again, your cost per lead is ultimately going to be determined by your by the size of your target audience. So if your goal is to get the lowest cost per lead, right, then I would encourage you to target as wide as you're possibly, or as wide as you're comfortable targeting, right? Because if you make that audience size too small, it's definitely gonna spike your cost per lead. And to kind of talk about what a cost per lead would be based on like different audience sizes. We'll kind of start like largest and go smallest. But like if you're targeting nationwide, right, you're targeting the entire U.S. And you're running Facebook ads, you should definitely be able to get leads in the 20s. So your cost per lead will be around $20. That's probably like the lowest it's going to get, right? Unless you start targeting other countries, which I don't imagine other people will do. But generally speaking, your cost per lead should be about $20 if you're going nationwide. And then say you're targeting a group of like entire states. So maybe you don't want to target every state in the U.S., but maybe you just want to target like the most investor friendly states, right? So maybe you pick a group of like 10 to 15 states, something like that, right? Your cost per lead will probably be around $25. And I think this is, a good strategy for people that want, leads in good markets that, you can do deals in, without increasing your cost per lead, too much, and avoiding, the South Carolinas and other states that are, not so, investor friendly or wholesale friendly, to be more specific. And then, to get a little bit more specific, say you picked like every major metro across the US. So you're still going, semi nationwide, but you're only targeting like the big markets in a state, right? So I'll give you, an example like Georgia, right? A lot of Georgia is kind of like rural, small town, but there's a few different pockets, in Georgia where, you know, most of the population is, right. So you're thinking about like Atlanta, Savannah, Augusta, Macon, Columbus. So like there's probably 5 or 6 metros across Georgia, where you'll probably have the most opportunity to get deals in. And most states are like that, right? Most states are going to have a handful of super populated areas, and the rest of the state's going to be less populated. So again, this is gonna, help eliminate some of those rural small town leads. But say you went across like every, you went across the US and picked out every, major metro in each state, right? I think your cost per lead would probably be about $30. I'm in the $30 range. Now, if we get a little bit more specific and we kind of get away from the nationwide, semi-nationwide targeting, right? And we just want to narrow in on, one state. I would say, your cost per lead range would probably be around, it'd probably be closer to like the $50 range. For bigger states, you'll probably be able to get it, a little bit under that. Um, if you're targeting Texas, right? Texas is a huge state, so you probably get under $50 a lead in Texas. But if you're targeting like Rhode Island, like super small state, so like that cost per lead is going to be obviously going to be higher than Texas because of the population different size differences. So, I would say $50 range, give or take, maybe a little bit lower. If you're targeting, a big state. But if you're targeting an entire state, I think that's probably where your cost per lead will land. And then, if you're targeting just one, metro, right? If you're targeting one city, if you're just a local wholesaler, right? Then, I would guess that your cost per lead would probably be in the $75 to $100 range, depending on which market you're targeting, right? Because there's a few factors other than like just the audience size, right? If there's a lot of competition in that market in terms of Facebook ads, like your cost per lead is going to be a little bit higher too. So, I've run campaigns in like Dallas Fort Worth, right? And I think the cost per lead kind of leveled out to like the $80 range. But Dallas Fort Worth is a huge market, but there's also a lot of competition in Dallas. So that that kind of explains why we were in the $80 range. But if you're in a smaller market than Dallas, like that's also competitive, I could easily see your cost per lead shooting up higher than $80, probably to the $100 or even more range. So these are kind of just examples of what it would look like cost per lead in terms of your target markets. All right, so now that we understand the cost per lead, we can kind of get down into how many leads is it going to take for you to get a contract when you're dealing with Facebook leads, right? Generally speaking, I would say it's probably going to take you about 20 to 30 leads to get a contract. And that'll vary by person, right? If you have, if you're experienced on the phones, you have multiple exit strategies. Your number's probably going to be closer to like 1 in 20, maybe even lower, right? We've had months where we've gone like 1 in 18. But then if you're on the opposite end of the spectrum, where it's kind of like you're new, you're not great on the phone, you only have one or two extra. I would say probably just one extra strategy, right? You're probably going to be in that 1 in 30 range, right? And typically, just from my experience, like I say, like if I get 30 leads in a month, one of them's probably going to be just like it's going to come in, they're going to be super motivated. The asking price is going to be, where we need it to be. And it's just going to be an easy one to get under contract, right? But, out of those other 29 leads that you have, you're going to have, leads that are like, varying in motivation, varying and, asking price. But you're still going to have a handful of leads that are, motivated, but maybe they're just asking a little bit too much money. So then it's kind of on you to, have the skills on the phones to get them down to a price that makes sense for both sides, and also have the exit strategies to get them to a closing table, right? So, I would say probably, again, 1 in 30 leads should get you a contract, conservatively speaking. And if you're better, then you should be able to get down to that 1 in 20 range. All right, so back to the main topic of this video is kind of the original question. What kind of budget should I have when I'm running Facebook ads? And again, it kind of it depends on a few different things, right? So again, we already kind of discussed. It's going to depend on the markets that you're targeting, and it's going to depend on how many leads it's going to take you to get to a contract, right? But I think conservatively speaking, we can just say it's going to take 30 leads to get to a contract. If you have experience, then you may, you should perform better than 1 in 30. But we right now we understand how many leads it takes to get to a contract. We understand how much one lead is going to cost. Next, we need to get kind of discuss what your goals look like, right? How many contracts are you looking to get a month? Are you trying to get one contract? Are you trying to get three contracts? Are you trying to get five contracts? Are you trying to get more? Right. And then basically, take your target number of, or your goal number of contracts, multiply that by 30. So that'll give you, how many leads you ultimately need to reach your goal, right? So, if you're only trying to get one contract, it's going to take you 30 leads. If you're trying to get five contracts, it's going to take you like 150 leads, right? And then from there, so we can take the number of leads that we need and multiply that by, the cost per lead range, right? So if we're going nationwide and we need 30 leads, it's going to cost us probably about $600 a contract. If you're super hyper local, you might want to bump that number up to like 100, right? And it's going to cost you about $3,000 per contract. So knowing how many leads it's going to take to get to get a contract, knowing the range that the leads are going to cost in your target markets, and knowing how many contracts you're trying to get a month. Knowing those three numbers, you should be able to reverse engineer and back into exactly what your budget will look like to reach your goals. So if you want to learn more about how we're running Facebook ads, we have a Skool community where we teach everything from A to Z, and I would encourage you to join it. The links in the description below. But we talk about everything from campaign structure to management to targeting, creating ads, using AI to help assist with the ad creation and kind of streamline the process of creating ads. We talk about it from A to Z in the Skool community. We also talk about Novations in the community. So, if you're looking to add that to your toolbox and have an extra exit strategy to improve your close rate, then, you can join, and we show, the exact sales process that we use for Novations, and, give you the scripts and contracts that you'll need to get them done. And finally, on top of that, we give all community members access to our $9 Facebook leads. So, if you're kind of in the boat where, you're not quite ready to start running your own ads, but you do want some, high quality inbound leads coming in, you can join the community and get started right away as you, learn how to run your ads. And, we have options for everybody. That's the goal. So if you, if you want to hear more about, again, Facebook ads, Novations, or you just want access to some more affordable leads, right? I'd encourage you to check it out. The link's in the description below. And if you like this video, please like, subscribe, leave a comment, share it with a friend, and we'll see you in the next one.